presentations, if you sit and you look at people who don't talk to you, so please do talk to me. So I've been asked to talk to you today about some of the nationally significant infrastructure projects that I run, and in particular some of the challenges around governance around those. So how many of you work on government projects? So you're actually going to relate to this very well, I think. I'm looking forward to having a conversation about it. So if we have a kick-off and just explain to you who I am. So I'm a sponsorship director for the Complex Infrastructure Programme at Highways England. I'll tell you a little bit about that Complex Infrastructure Programme, but does anybody know what a sponsorship director is? Any idea? Project sponsor? Any idea? Yeah, so do you want to share with us what that is?
We don't have any sponsor directors, we just have sponsors, and they're the generally the people who do all the early work in getting the projects approved through authority and things like that.
Yeah, so I think that's absolutely right. So one of my roles is to take projects through governance to make sure we get some money, which is always exciting. And this has suddenly gone a lot louder, so hopefully that's not too loud. But the other thing is I'm responsible for the outcomes of the project. I always think a project director is responsible for the outputs. They need to, in my case, they need to build the roads, they need to build the bridges, they need to build the tunnels. But in terms of making sure that people get from that what they need, that's absolutely my job. And in particular, as you'll see as we go through, what I'm most interested in is the legacy that we leave. Because a road isn't just a road, and that's the same for other significant infrastructure projects. Prior to this role, I've only been in post about 6 months. I was the head of portfolio insight for the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. So those of you that heard David Hancock speak, he's a colleague of mine. We work very closely together. And prior to that, I've been a project director, a programme director, a portfolio director, because I'm very old, you see, so I've been through a number of jobs. And I'm also a visiting professor, and I love going to Manchester University because they actually call me professor, which sounds really important. I'm not actually really important. And one or two of you might have heard of Project X. So Project X is a collaborative venture between academia, government and industry that I set up and I lead as well. So if anybody's interested in that sort of thing, please do follow me later, because I'm not going to cover it in this presentation. But what I am going to cover is what's on the screen now. So I'm going to kick off just very, very briefly talking about the road investment strategy. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about GMPP, the Government Major Projects Portfolio, and where my projects sit within that. My project programme is the Complex Infrastructure Programme, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the 3 projects in there and their challenges and opportunities. And then I'll tell you a little bit about control, because that's what I'm supposed to be talking about. But I think control is the least interesting thing. So if you want me to talk more about control, that's fine. And then we'll talk about the overall challenges in the context of control. Does that sound okay? I have a lady at the back who's going to tell me when I've been speaking for too long, but I don't think that should be a problem. So, Highways England, do most of you realise it's not actually government anymore? It's a wholly owned government company. Okay? It started off with a 5-year block of funding called the Road Investment Strategy 1, and that was to really deliver the long-term infrastructure that we need in this country, because we've had a dearth of investment in roads and infrastructure in the UK. So in England, we got this wonderful budget of 15.2 billion, and the idea was to do lots and lots and lots of infrastructure delivery on roads. So I was on the M6 the other day, 22 miles of roadworks, continuous roadworks. Anybody experienced that recently? Isn't it lovely? However, there's a good reason for it. I have to say, I went back to my customer team and said, why 22 miles? Does it have to be that long? Can't we have it in blocks? There's a reason. Guess what the reason is? Cost. Yeah, that's what I said as well. So anyway, the important thing is that we do have the RIS1, this first lot of investment. RIS2 starts in 2020. We're expecting that to be about 18 billion. And so that allows us to really invest. And one of the things in government projects, which is a major source of problems, is actually that you don't know when whether your budget's going to continue. It tends to be on an annualised cycle. Do you recognise that, those of you in government? You don't actually know if you're going to get the money. Whereas at least in Highways England, we have these 5-year blocks of money, and we're currently negotiating for the next 5-year block. So I mentioned the government major projects portfolio. I don't know how many of you know about this, but in my role of head of portfolio insight, it was my job to collect data and information from the projects, these major projects in government. There's about 143 at this snapshot, which was September last year. The data only gets published annually. And that is £473 billion worth of investment. And the reason that I'm putting this up here is just to show you that the infrastructure element of that is 222 billion. So I'm just trying to set a context to the projects, really. So in the government major projects portfolio, 222 billion in infrastructure, which, as I say, is a big increase in government's commitment to infrastructure. If you actually break that down and have a look at the sectors, you can see that the transport sector represents 43% of that. What do you reckon the single biggest project is? Infrastructure. HS2. Yeah, HS2 is the single biggest project. But nevertheless, 16 projects makes up 43% of that investment. So there is a real investment and commitment to development of transport infrastructure at the moment. So very quickly diverting to explain what the complex infrastructure programme is. So that's SIP. A14, Huntingdon to Cambridge. Anybody drove on that wonderful road? Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it great when you're on that two-lane bit and one of the lorries decides it wants to go and overtake, and then 10 miles later they've probably edged a little bit further along. So the Huntingdon to Cambridge, it's already in delivery. The key thing about that one is it was, and it probably is at the moment, the biggest road infrastructure project there is. It's due to be completed. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. Stonehenge, who's visited Stonehenge? Anybody driven past Stonehenge? Or anybody sat in a traffic jam outside Stonehenge? Yeah, that's the one. And last but not least, how about the Dartford Tunnel? Who loves the Dartford Tunnel? Anybody love the Dartford Tunnel? Well, the Lower Thames crossing is supposed to be helping us with the fact that nobody really likes the Dartford Tunnel. And that's complex infrastructure programme. So going back to facts and figures then, the first graph here represents the fact that infrastructure and construction is sitting there at the 223, it's been rounded up, billion, of which the proportion that relates to Department for Transport, so that's the transport part as we saw earlier, is the 43%, and of that you can see there that £8 billion worth is invested in those three projects. So it's quite a hefty chunk of money. I mean, that's a few chocolate bars, isn't it? So, and I'm just showing you this because I think it's important to just get a feeling for, how much investment there really are. And the Complex Infrastructure Programme is only one of 4 programmes that are really delivering some very large projects within Highways England. So if we kick off with that A14, okay, I've been on the A14 site recently. It's just amazing. It really is. It's just such a big area of development. It really sort of gets your mind blowing, to be honest. And what we're doing here is we're introducing a new bypass from Huntingdon, widening the A14, so hopefully the lorries will stick to the first 2 lanes and those of us who want to go a bit faster can get past them, and improving connection links. So it's a really, really, really big undertaking. And the reason that we're doing this is, as shown here, the problem was, in 2014, 71,000 vehicles, okay? And the biggest impact is about those heavy goods vehicles, so 26% of heavy goods vehicles, because that is their route. And so, if they get out there in the outside lanes, very difficult to take over. If you want to come and join us, there are some seats at the front. I know that nobody likes to sit at the front, but... So what we're doing is we're investing about £1.5 billion, slightly less than that actually. And in terms of the timescales for this, we're expecting to get this project open by December 2020, and it's on track. But the biggest challenge is archaeology. So does anybody recognise archaeology as a problem in infrastructure development? Yeah? So do you want to share? No? So archaeology for us is a real problem because they did do an archaeological study before they started. They did say there was some archaeology there, but what they didn't expect was to find quite so much. So when they kicked off, they thought, yeah, there's going to be some interesting things. And there's one area which is called Borough Pit 1, which has got some fantastic Saxon village in there. It's absolutely brilliant. But the rest of it, it's a little bit, a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of something else. But nevertheless, the time that's being taken to actually clear those sites is just having a massive, massive impact on the delivery of the project. So we have to get to a situation where we can get some sensible delivery at the same time as protecting what is really important. Because you can't do anything, once you've destroyed archaeology, you can't do anything about it, can you? So it's really important to get it right. But that is really slowing us down. So if you think about the next project I'm going to talk about, Stonehenge, what do you think might be my biggest challenge there? Yeah. In terms of opportunities, though, this is an interesting project, A14, because it's mainly around Huntingdon. So those of you that know Huntingdon, at the moment there's this great big viaduct in Huntingdon, and it's the most ugliest, horrible thing in the world. And we're actually going to take it down. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to do a bypass around Huntingdon, and so the centre of Huntingdon is going to be totally transformed as a result of this project. So when we're talking about legacy, we have a real opportunity to work with Huntingdon, Cambridge City Council, the local communities, all the rest of it, and that's indeed what we are doing, to find lots of different projects that we can do to support the communities, right from the level of community funds, so people can come in and bid for money, right up to things, as I say, as big as actually removing a viaduct. And that, for me, is what makes these projects so interesting, is the legacy that we leave. And today, we're actually celebrating 1 year from the starting of the actual construction period. So there's a party later on that I'm going to, so I'm very excited about that. The A303 is quite a different project, it really is. So most of you have said that you've gone past Stonehenge. There's been a lot of press around this project. Has anybody seen the press recently about the project? Yeah, we recently announced the preferred route on the 12th of September, and you have a lot of groups there that really are not in favour of this project. But just to set it in context, you can see there the road and its proximity to the Stonehenge. And what the intention of this project is actually to put a tunnel, not under Stonehenge. It really isn't under Stonehenge. It's actually more or less under the route of the existing road. And then we're going to have a green spaces across that whole area. So at the moment, the north and south of the World Heritage Site in which Stonehenge is in is completely bisected. But actually what we're going to be doing is people are going to be able to walk across. So the National Trust and English Heritage and Historic England are very, very excited about this project. They're arguing with us about one or two things, like, where do you put your portals and, how much cut and cover, and can you see, we don't want to see the road. If you're looking, there's lots of different barrow groups in the World Heritage Site. But actually people are very excited about this. And the people who live nearby at the moment, because you're stuck on that traffic jam going past Stonehenge, people do the rat running. And so they're very excited about it as well. However, there are people like the Stonehenge Alliance, and I think Tony Robinson, most of us know Tony from the Time team, very anti this project. So it's really interesting that there's such a lot of really significant support, and equally there's people who are against it. Now this just gives you an idea of how long it is, so 2.9 kilometres of twin-board tunnel, so it's a very big undertaking we're here, and 12 kilometres of new dual carriageway through. And the pink area, I think it's pinky, is actually the World Heritage Site. So it gives you an idea of the area in which we're doing this work. So coming back to the idea of challenges and opportunities, this particular poster here is actually off the site at the moment. This is from the Stonehenge Alliance site. You must stop this because if we do this road, it's going to really destroy the World Heritage Site. That's what they're saying. The reality is at the moment there's this great big road car park going through, and what we're doing is we're going to be removing that from the landscape. So actually I find it quite difficult to understand that. However, I do understand people's concerns in relation to protecting the archaeology, and trust me, we're going to do a lot of archaeological surveys and what have you in this particular one. But the opportunity here is really around economic growth and heritage benefits. Because at the moment, the A303 is one of the key routes from the southeast to the southwest. And the southwest is really deprived. And the idea is that if you can improve the infrastructure, you can improve the roads going to it, that's going to really regenerate. And that is, for me, that regeneration in the southwest is one of the key reasons that we're doing this project. So it's a really interesting one. But also, for me, the project that I'm going to be most proud of is if I can go back to Stonehenge and instead of looking from the barrow across to Stonehenge and seeing this great big car park, to actually see green spaces and to be able to walk across. That, for me, is what legacy is. That will make me feel very proud as I retire, which hopefully I'll be able to do by the time this project finishes. So, in terms of when we're expecting to finish this one, 2026. So we're expecting to start the work off in 2021. Okay? Lower Thames Crossing. Okay, so the Lower Thames Crossing is huge. This is the project that's going to cost around £5 to £6 billion. So again, lots of chocolate in that one. And it's designed to create an alternative route to Dartford. Looking at the most recent traffic modelling, the amount of traffic that people are expecting to go through Dartford is going up exponentially. It's actually scarily exponentially. So the sooner that we can get an alternative crossing open so that people can actually get across from one side to the other, the better. So this is the problem. The problem is that at the moment we have 50 million crossings a year and traffic volumes are increasing significantly. If there's a problem, it can be 3 to 5 hours that people are stuck there. I mean, that's just not anything to even conceive of, is it? And if you're a local resident who has to get across regularly, can you imagine how frustrating it is not actually knowing that you can get to work? I mean, this is a real issue. And that was why the Lower Thames Crossing was devised. And this is what it looks like in terms of where we're trying to do the thing. So you can see the little red dots on here are all the bridges. But the reality is then there's a massive great gap between the Blackwall Tunnel to the Dartford Crossing and then nothing. You know, you can immediately see why there's a problem here. So here the tunnel is slightly longer than it was for Stonehenge. Again, twin board tunnel, but we're going to have 3 lanes in each of the tunnels and 3 lanes leading up to the tunnels as well to keep that throughput of traffic, and 22.8 kilometres of new dual carriageway. It's actually saying new 3-lane carriageway. So that's a phenomenal amount of construction. And I understand if you look at the tunnel boring machine we're going to have to buy, it's going to be 4 stories high. I mean, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? 4-story high. Would anybody like to be in control of that machine? I think I'd find it quite scary, actually. So on this one, I'm going to give you a little bit more background because a colleague of mine, Ian Minns, I don't know whether he's here yet, can't see him, but he is going to be doing the presentation after this one in this zone. And he's going to be digging in a little bit more to Lower Thames Crossing. But I just want to sort of set it out there. So why is the Lower Thames Crossing a challenge? Well, it's really, really complicated. So one of the complications, which I think will amuse some of you, is that the link roads are going to be privately financed under the new PF2 model, and the tunnel itself is going to be publicly financed. So if you think about the contractual arrangements there, you've got a special purpose vehicle that's going to be building the link roads, you've got a public sector company of some sort, presumably, who's going to be building the tunnel, and then somebody's got to integrate all that good stuff. And then there's other stuff as well, like early works and what have you. It's really going to be a very, very complicated thing to do. And allied to that, there is a huge political pressure to speed up this. This is a Brexit project, okay? This is a project that's going to really impact from a Brexit perspective. We need to get this area opened up. It will support regeneration. It will maximise all sorts of opportunities in this area. So we are being pushed very, very hard to do it as quickly as possible. But if you've got that complexity of, first of all, you've got to go through a whole load of planning, I'll come to in a second, then you've got to get all this funding in place, then you've got to actually build something, and it's at the edge, the cutting edge of infrastructure delivery as well. You can imagine it's going to be quite a complicated thing to do. So this is where governance and controls comes in. So I have got a link there to governance and controls as we go through here. But just looking at the opportunities, I don't know how well you can read that. But again, for me, this is going to be a really important legacy that we leave with this one. And we are only now really starting to talk to the communities and the people in the local area about what we can do to support them, as well as get this road and tunnel built. Okay? So I'm starting to sort of build up a little bit towards the controls area now. And so we're going to continue with the theme with the Lower Thames Crossing. So in April this year, we announced the preferred route, and that was the route that I showed you on the map previously. Okay? So at the moment, we're in development phase. The development phase itself is costing £500 million. So if you think about some of the projects that people run, you know, that's quite a big project in itself, isn't it? The development phase of this project. And the environmental studies, the traffic modelling, the ground investigations, dare I say archaeology? You know, archaeology as well. All this stuff is what's happening at the moment in our build-up to statutory consultation, which we intend to proceed with in mid-2018. Okay? And that's where we're going to be going out and saying, what do you reckon, guys? We're also going to be finalising the design ahead of our DCO application. That's Development Consent Order application, which is the planning process that we need to go through in order to get approvals to proceed with this project. And once we've done that, we can actually start on site and then it opens. And if you picture it like this, it almost looks as though each of those time blocks is the same, doesn't it? But just to let you know, the period from now to when we're hoping, please, that we'll get our development consent order granted is about 3 years. And then the period from there to opening in 2027 thereabouts, that's 7 years. And there's Ian, who's going to be taking over after me. Hello, Ian. So it gives you an idea of the sort of period that we're working at. So governance and controls, that's what we're supposed to be talking about today. So in Highways England, we have a thing called the Project Control Framework, and I suspect this is very similar to the models that all of you use. It's a project lifecycle model where there's a series of gates, and we have to go through those gates to be able to get approval to go to the next stage. So the big green arrow there, that shows you where we're up to in the process. So I joined Highways England in May, and my first job was to go through the governance life cycle, which I'm going to share with you, to get approval for part of, not the whole of, the outline business case. Horrendous process, and I'll tell you why in a second. But having got that approval, we're now in preliminary design with a view to the FBC being done in about 3 years' time, and then that will give us permission to proceed. But these SCARs, we call them, which are these stage gates, happen rigorously. There's a lot of documentation that goes around those, and if we don't get that right, we are not allowed to proceed. So at one level, this is a very strict control, and it is a very important control, and nobody plays fast and loose with it, because if they're not ready, then that means that your project is delayed. So does this sound similar to the sort of stage gates that you've got in your life cycle models? Yeah? Okay, I mean, if anybody's interested in the picture, then obviously it'll be available on the slides, which will be circulated. But if you want any more information, I'm very happy we have a booklet about the project control framework, which gives all the details behind what goes into each of the stage gates. But I'm not going to bore you with it now, because I suspect most of you could guess. From an assurance perspective, if you start to look at the assurance as opposed to the controls aspects of it, those stage gate assessment reviews, which I mentioned, those are one part of the assurance, and you can see, as I say, it's just the same cut as before. But we also have a thing called gateway reviews or IPA reviews, again coming back to the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. So, I mean, how many of you have done those sorts of IPA reviews? Anybody here an IPA reviewer? Just the one? Anybody who's had them done to them? Oh, that's interesting. So maybe most of you are from the private sector background. But basically, this is really essential. This is government's way of saying, are you ready to proceed to the next stage? Now, the key gateway reviews that we have are quite regimented. So, for instance, before we did the outline business case, there was a gateway review. And just so that you know what I'm talking about, this is where an independent team, not IPA, but a team appointed by IPA, specialist people go in and they get all the documentation on the project. They talk to everybody they want to talk to, including people like ministers and senior officials. And then they say, what is your confidence of delivery? What is your delivery confidence assessment? And that then feeds into the governance cycle. And I'll show you where that comes in a moment. Okay, so those gateway reviews happen at specific periods through the project life cycle. Okay, but they're not the only times that we do them. We do have other reviews as well. And unfortunately, I hope nobody from NAO is here, but just to say, unfortunately, in my view, we've been told that we're going to have an NAO review on one of those projects shortly as well, or we're likely to. So they're not the only assurance we do, and assurance is really important. And the only reason I say unfortunately with the NAO is obviously it takes a lot of work. Not that I don't think assurance is important, but these are the key ones that we do on all of our projects. Now, I'm not going to talk to this particular one, but I just wanted to show it to you because this is how horrendous the governance process actually is for these projects. And I'm going to simplify it a little bit in the next one, but just to show you where the stage gate assurance reviews, the SGARs and the Infrastructure Project Authority reviews are, you'll see on the far side, those are coloured in a slightly different colour, okay? But let me simplify it a bit because there's a bit too much to really look at there. Now this is simplified, but it's still quite complicated. But it gives you an idea about how we go through our decision-making process, our assurance process, and the things that we do to coordinate and resolve issues. So if we start at the bottom, we have a thing called a project executive group, and that's really the people that made the day-to-day decisions on the running of the project. Okay? And this is for the A303, but it applies to all the projects. Now, I mentioned that the A303 was, actually I didn't mention, the A303 is going to be privately financed. That's going to be entirely privately financed. So we have a procurement steering group because it's going to be pretty complicated to get the special purpose vehicle in place to do that. But the key decision-making group for the project is a project committee. Some people call them boards. Presumably all of you have got boards, so our project committee is our boards. And because we're part of the Complex Infrastructure Programme, we also have a programme committee. And that programme committee takes some decisions, but only those that are cross-cutting. So the main decisions are made at the project committee. So you think about me coming in and having to write the first outline business case for this project. I start off by getting approval through PEG, through project committee, and then through the programme committee, okay? So that probably takes, 2 months or something? I don't mean the time to write it, that takes a lot longer. The next thing that we do is we jump to the governance within the Highways England Executive Group, which is called the Investment Decision Committee. So any project that's over 500 million is called a Tier 1 project and has to go through all of this. And therefore we next need to go to this group and say, can we please spend the money, can we proceed? When they say yes, we can then go to the investment board. So the Highways England board, there's an investment committee of the Highways England board, and they have to say yes. And when they've said yes, we have to go to the DFT because we don't belong to the DFT. As I say, we're a wholly owned government company, but in essence, they oversee all our work, they are our client. So we need to go to them and say, please can we proceed with this, please can we have some money? And they say, oh, all right then. And then we proceed to their ministers. But that's not the end of it, because obviously it's the Treasury that pays for some of this, or the Treasury has to approve that we proceed even if it's privately financed, because obviously there's potential impacts on balance sheets and all the rest of it. So having gone to the DFT ministers, we also need to go to the Treasury, and we do that usually called the Major Project Review Group, which again is on the far side, which is an assurance group where we all get together, we talk about, is this project fit to go? And then that group will say to their minister, the Treasury Minister, this is okay, and the DFT Minister will say to the Treasury Minister, it's okay. So this process, end to end, takes about 6 months. So from the time that your business case is written, to go through this process takes about 6 months. So if you're on an accelerated timescale, like we are on the Lower Thames crossing, can you realise what the impact of that is on delivery? You can't stop and spend 6 months going through this review cycle. You have to be continuing with the work in the meantime. So one of the biggest complexities that we have on Lower Thames crossing, and I don't know whether Ian's going to touch on it in detail, is how do we keep the work going at the same time as getting the approvals to do the work in the first place? So part of that is actually looking forward. So in the outline business case that we're proceeding with, and we take the next draft next summer, we're going to be asking for approval to proceed with the procurement. We're going to be asking for approval to proceed with early enabling works. We're going to be asking for approval to start the negotiations around the tunnel boring machine, even though at that stage we haven't got a full business case and the full costs and the full understanding of what we're going to do. So that's our governance. Because of the fact that's quite complicated, we also have opportunities to tap into our chief executive in the SIP business review meeting. So we say, Jim is our chief executive, what do you think about this? And he'll say, I think you should do this, I think you should do this, you get my support with this. It's really, really important to unblock. And we also have a thing called the Tier 1 Analysis and Policy Group, Tier 1 Forum, and quarterly tripartite meetings, which are meetings with DFT and Treasury and ourselves to be able to proceed as well. So all those things are helping us to resolve any issues that then feed into the governance, which means that we get our approvals. And in the meantime, as I mentioned, all the way up to the National Audit Office, we have a whole series of assurance reviews and activities that are taking place. So that's the process that we need to go through. So it's pretty horrendous. Does anybody recognise this sort of thing? You know, I mean, it's a lot of money. I mean, at the end of the day, one way or other, this is taxpayers' money. Even if it's privately financed, we have to pay the private financiers back. So it's sensible, but it does mean that it's very difficult to proceed at pace. So if I come to my last slide where I talk about the overall challenges, you know, looking at this, the strict regulatory, I haven't talked much about regulation, but the planning process, the delivery consent orders, all of that, that's very regimented, very strict. It's got certain timescales around it, which again mean that planning a project is difficult. The whole governance and assurance processes, all of those means it's really, really difficult to proceed at pace. And if you have a project that needs to proceed at pace, then that really is that is what's on the critical path. Ironically, it's the governance and the regulation that's on the critical path, not actually constructing the thing or designing the thing. Okay? In relation to Lower Thames Crossing, but equally for something like Stonehenge, there's a great deal of political uncertainty. I don't know whether you know, but the Stonehenge project proceeded right through planning twice before, and at the end of the day, the project was pulled. We're hoping this time it won't be, so please keep your fingers crossed, because it would be nice to get rid of that road in the middle of the World Heritage Site. But you just don't know, do you? Because different priorities come up, ministers change, etc. So the impact, the political impact on our project, and even this desire for this Brexit project, the Lower Thames Crossing, to proceed quickly, in itself provides uncertainty. Because as I say, trying to move quicker than actually is comfortable can be difficult, because all of us know good project planning is essential, don't we? We know that you need to plan, the plans need to be realistic, you need to make sure that you avoid optimism bias and all that sort of stuff. But if you're proceeding at pace, very, very difficult. And if you're proceeding on parallel tracks, like we are on the Lower Thames Crossing, it only takes one of those to come unstuck for the whole thing to become a bit of a pack of cards. And that is absolutely influenced by the drive to do it quicker than it's comfortable. There are so many stakeholders in these projects. I mean, we have our Druids on Stonehenge, that's one group. Actually, they're in favour, largely speaking, I think. But then we have, as I say, others who are against. On the Lower Thames Crossing, certain of the councils are more in favour than others. But there's so many stakeholders. The stakeholder list will probably be long enough that you could put it around this room if you wrote it out. And they all have different interests and motivations, and that makes it very complicated. The funding model. PF2 for these huge projects is quite new. So PFI, obviously, that's changed now to PF2. PF2 is a different model, and we are going to be testing it, really stress testing it with these large projects. We've talked about archaeology, as I say, really in favour of archaeology. Talked about heritage, really important we get that right. But actually, when we're doing construction on that World Heritage Site, there's going to be lots of people with lots of diggers. It's going to make quite an impact, and that's something we have to manage very sensitively. And for me, the biggest thing, because I would say this, because I'm a sponsorship director, is optimising the outcomes from delivery. Making sure that we don't just do the road and it's a road, that we absolutely do everything that we can to ensure that we improve the legacy of what we're doing in the local area. So, I think I'm on time, and that is it. So, any questions for me? Did you know I used all these slides? I've forgotten I'd used all that many. That's me at the bottom. Terry.Harrington@highwaysengland.co.uk. And thank you very much indeed.